All right. So first of all, we fought a war with the British together. Okay, we were all the British Army, what we'd call the colonists. We fought a war together in the 1760s, 50s and 60s. We usually call it the French and Indian War, and it was against, you could probably guess, the French and the Indians. All right, and we won that war. And what we got, or what England got, because we were still part of England, was Canada. We got Canada. So for a while, we were part of Canada. So there was a time where Canada and the United States, we weren't the United States back then, but we were all England. We were all part of England. So what happened in that war, and this is just a painting that I've always liked of one of the battles. Another famous painting is this one, because this guy right here was the first president of the United States. Who's the first president?
George Washington.
That's right. That's George Washington. Did you have a question?
Don't you have that painting at your house?
I don't, but I actually would get it, which may seem a little weird, but I would definitely put this painting on my wall. I like paintings of the war for some reason. So we fought alongside the British, and this guy in particular, George Washington, who is an American, meaning he was born in America, he got famous from that war. He became well known. He was a very young man. He was only 21, and in this particular battle, actually, this guy has just gotten shot. He is General Braddock of the British, and he was killed in that battle. Washington was not, but there's an incredible story that when after the battle, he had all these bullet holes in his coat, and he was never hit. And he had several horses shot out from under him, and he never died. And an Indian chief later told him that, I had my rifle on you, and I shot at you several times, and I just couldn't get you. So he believed that was what he would call divine providence, that God was protecting him. Yes, sir?
We did a history lesson, and it was kind of talking about this, and it said he had like 2 horses shot under for him.
Yeah.
But was never hurt.
And he was never hurt. Yeah. Yes, sir. Really quick.
I was gonna say, what does revolutionary mean?
Revolutionary means a huge change, a really, really big change. Something is revolutionary. It's a really, really, really big change.
So that means the Revolutionary War changed everything.
That's exactly what it means. Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. Very good. All right. So then the taxes. So after the war come the taxes, and the idea from England is basically, you guys fought the war, or we fought the war, we won it, and we helped you guys, so now you get to help out with our budget. You get to help pay some things off. But the problem was that most of the colonists had was that they were not getting much of a say in those taxes. All right, so we had the Sugar Act, the Stamp Act. Somebody mentioned the Stamp Act. Who mentioned the Stamp Act? You mentioned the Stamp Act? Yeah, so that was a big deal. That was every time you sent something. Not only did you have to have postage, you had to have the stamp from the king, but you had to have the king's seal on it too. So back then you used to get wax, and you would like seal envelopes, and you had to have a particular seal. So it was more expensive, and it costed more money, and people didn't like that either. So there was a bunch of things here. The Intolerable Acts, the Townshend Act included tea, and that's what led to this, the Boston Tea Party, which you might have heard before, which I have a really hard time with because I love tea. I'm a big tea drinker, and it just hurts to know that all that tea was dumped into the harbor. And I wonder if you took a cup and you scooped some of the water out, if it would taste like tea, but it would be salty. So, no. All right, so then another big thing that happened that kind of started to, we would say, stoke the flames was the Boston Massacre, which was a couple years before the war started. But this is when basically a bunch of guys were throwing snowballs, and some of the British soldiers opened fire, and a bunch of people got killed. And ironically, the guy who defended the British soldiers in court was John Adams, who was also there when they voted to separate from England. He was defending the British a few years earlier. So that was an interesting event. Then we had the Boston Tea Party. I just mentioned that. All that tea. And then we had there was two important events. One was the first Continental Congress. That's when all these representatives got together to decide what they were going to do about all the things that England was doing. All right, and they wrote a document. They said, "Listen, we got a bunch of problems." They sent it to England, and they basically got no reply. So that didn't really work out. And so really, the match that really struck things off was in 1775, April 18th was the night that Paul Revere, you probably have heard of Paul Revere, did his midnight ride. It was the 18th of April in 75, and nary a man is still alive who remembers the famous date and year of the midnight ride of Paul Revere. Now you'll never forget it. And this was, basically what happened was the British came in and they were going to go take some guns, because the colonists were stockpiling guns. So they were going to come in and grab the guns, and before they could, they said, no, we're going to shoot you with them. And then things touched off, and that was the first skirmish. It wasn't really that big, but it was the first time that there were bullets flying between the two sides. Then the big one came a couple months later on Bunker Hill. And if you ever get the chance to go to Boston and see the hill, it's a very, very big hill. It's a very nice town there now. But this was a big battle. Over 1,000 British soldiers were killed or wounded in that battle. So this is when things started to get a lot bigger. And there's a very, very famous line that this guy, the general who was commanding the colonists, said. He said, "Don't fire till you see the whites of their eyes." So the British are coming up, and don't fire till you can actually see the white. So then you'll be accurate. All right. So then things get bigger. But notice this is still 1775. What have we not had yet? What have we not had yet? What hasn't happened? The Declaration of Independence. So the Declaration of Independence is actually written over a year after the fighting has already started. So it makes sense that they said that he's come in and he's plundered our town and he's destroyed things and he's done all these nasty things because at this point they've already been fighting for a while, right? So that makes sense. All right. So then another big issue was the king hired Germans. All right. So not even English, German people. He hired them to come in and fight and try to subdue the colonies. And at one point they were in New York City. They had come into New York. And that was like even more offensive. It was like, okay, now you're hiring people who they don't even speak English. They're coming in here and you're not even using your own soldiers. You're hiring other soldiers. So they found that to be very demeaning. So that was a big issue too. All right, I'm going to skip over for now. All right, then we had the Declaration of Independence. We just talked a whole bunch about that. And then people kind of divide up into two different groups. You have the Patriots, who are also called Whigs. Right? They're the ones who support independence. And then you have the Loyalists, who are also called Tories. And as much as it sometimes shames me to say, I have both, but I have a whole bunch of Loyalists in my bloodline, in my family, if you go back far enough. So I have both in my family. About a third of the colonists, of the people living in America, are Patriots. About a third are Loyalists, and then another third kind of don't care. They're like, I just don't want any part in this. Either way. And that's where things are at when the Declaration of Independence is written. But other things happen. There's a couple of major battles. This is a really famous painting. Does anyone know what this one is? You know what this one is?
I've seen that picture.
You've seen this one before?
Delaware River.
The Delaware River, that's right. Can you tell me anything about that?
Well, I do know that this happened during that really, really cold winter.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Can you tell me anything else, though?
Yeah, it was Christmas. It was
If I say Dylan, can you tell me
George
anything else?
Washington crossing the Delaware River.
Yeah. Can you add to that?
Well, it was Christmas Eve night.
That's right.
They were gonna attack the Germans and British.
That's right. Yeah, they attacked the Hessians. And they sailed in and they got the element of surprise, right? Because they sailed in and nobody expected them to attack on Christmas, but they did, right? Do you remember anything else about that?
Well, me and my brother kind of experienced it a little because our mom put a bunch of ice in a bowl and we put our feet in it.
Oh, that is hands-on history. I love that. That is so cool. Do you remember anything else about this?
I do remember that the Germans and the British were feasting. So they just come in and by surprise they just kill the commander and then the British and the Germans are just like, what do we do? We don't have anyone to command us.
Yeah, they actually barely had to fire a shot. Because they just came in and it was like, oh, I guess we cannot do anything, and that was it. Yeah, do you know anything else about that?
I just want to say, was Benedict Arnold there?
Hold that thought. I don't remember. But hold that thought, because you said Benedict Arnold, and I learned some really interesting things that we're going to learn when we go to New Windsor about him. All right, because when I was like 13, I did a whole book report on Benedict Arnold. I had to read a book, and I did all this study, but I didn't realize that most of the stuff with him happened very close to here. So hold that thought. Don't forget Benedict Arnold. Don't let me finish without talking about Benedict Arnold. Okay, so let's see, Christmas. All right, then we had this is Princeton. So this was another battle that George Washington won, because George Washington was up here in the north. There was a battle in the north, and there was a war in the north and a war in the south. And then the big, what we call the, we're not there yet. In between that was Valley Forge, which, have any of you been there to Valley Forge? Valley Forge is in Pennsylvania, and it was very, very cold.
Never been to Valley Forge.
No, and it was a lot of the soldiers were dying of sickness, and there wasn't really a lot to eat, and so it was a very rough winter, but they got through it. And this, I can't really see it. This painting is actually hanging up in Pastor's living room. So some of you who've been into the house have seen that. This is my mom's favorite painting, which is why it's hanging up there. And that's George Washington praying at Valley Forge. All right. Okay, so this is a map of New York. We are right around here. Right? There's West Point Military Academy. And then these are movements going around the Hudson Valley, which is where we live. There's no really, really big battles in the Hudson Valley. There's no huge battles in New York. Like close to where we live, but our area is really, really important. I'm going to show you why in a second. Okay, so this one right here. Now, this is the only one that bothers me because I've never been to this one. Can anyone read that? Saratoga. Saratoga is what we call the turning point of the war. So that happened a couple years into the war. There was a big battle that was fought there. George Washington was victorious, and I've never been to the battlefield. And it's not that far from here. It's only like a 2-hour drive, and I've never been there. So maybe one day we could all go there. That would be cool. All right. So then, this is where we're going to do in a couple of weeks comes in. So the war basically ends in 1881. This is after the war starts in the north, and then it moves south. There's a bunch of battles that go on in the south until later in the war. But then in 1881, so that's 75, 6, 7, 8, 9, 6 years later, the war basically comes to an end in Yorktown, Virginia. Okay? So that's where General Cornwallis, the main British general, is defeated by George Washington. And the colonists and the French are there too. The French really helped us out there. But after that, that's Yorktown. Oh, there's the surrender. So that's Washington, that is Cornwallis. So Washington looks victorious, he's up on his horse. Cornwallis is kind of not so victorious because he lost. All right, so this is where, now we're going to talk about our area real quick, and then we'll be done, okay? So this is at West Point. This is a big chain, all right? And I learned this a few years ago. This chain used to, or part of this is this wouldn't stretch across the Hudson River. It's too small. But these are links of a chain that used to stretch across the Hudson River a few miles south of here. And the point of the chain was so that boats could not come up. And so the chain was put up, and the British cut it, and it was put up again, and the British cut it. But some of those links have been saved. And the reason was, even though there wasn't a lot of fighting around here, they wanted control of our area, of the Hudson Valley, because the river, that was basically the highway of the time. That's how you move things back and forth. So the river was really, really important. After the war had basically ended, it was technically still going on, but in 1881, into that winter, Washington came up to New York, right by where we are, and he made camp basically for the winter in Newburgh. So this is the house that he stayed in while he was there, and his wife Martha came to stay with him. She would usually come to wherever he was during the winter. And I learned that this house is actually a very popular. It's been very popular to put in paintings, and lots of people have come and painted this house. I think that's actually the end of my thing. So what we'll hopefully do when we go there in a few weeks is we'll kind of get to know what was life like, because there really wasn't fighting going on. It was just all these soldiers waiting just in case there was another battle that came up, because the British still occupied New York City. New York City was really, really important, but they were still running the show down there. And so the army was waiting, ready to go to battle in case they had to. But thankfully, never had to. Oh, yes. Yeah. Okay, yes. All right, so let's talk really quick about Benedict Arnold. So, Benedict Arnold, so this is at West Point. Let me go back to the map. Really, really quick. Okay, so West Point is here. So Benedict Arnold basically, there was some troop movements going on in the area of West Point, and Arnold was told, I think he was told to basically to attack, and instead of attacking, he fled to the enemy, and gave them all the information that he had. And so Benedict Arnold is known as the original traitor. He's like, it used to be if somebody betrayed you in, if you're playing a game, you'd be like, you, Benedict Arnold! His name became almost like a bad word that people would call each other, because he was just known as such a traitor. So most people don't know who he is anymore, but he left the war was almost over when he did it. It was a very bad decision on his part, because his entire reputation was completely tarnished and ruined by betraying Washington. But that was right around West Point, so it was only a few miles down the river from here that happened, that he fled to the British.